Complexities of Jewish Friendship, Jews and Non-Jews in the Kaiserreich. Imperial Germany opened extraordinary opportunities for Jews, politically and economically. I do not have to tell this audience about the political rights of Jews, and especially of Jewish men, achieved in the German Empire. They thought they had reached a safe harbor, in quotes. So this talk will focus on grassroots social interactions, and where possible on the feelings these evoked among Jews, both heartening and discouraging. Before starting this discussion, I should add a word about contingencies, which in German is die Kontingenz oder der Zufall, usually, but I think of it as contingencies. Whether the stage of a life, the geographic site, the economy, or politics. Whereas discomfort with Jews, othering, and outright anti-Semitism existed in many non-Jewish circles, not in all, anti-Semitism set limits on Jewish success and also the boundaries against which Jews pushed relentlessly and often successfully. Anti-Semitism crucially depended on the times, often heightened by economic and political agitation, taking on new energy with the stock market crash and the First Great Depression, along with the Christian social movement of court chaplain Adolf Stöcker. And yet, by the early 20th century, the anti-Semitic parties had seriously declined, although social anti-Semitism lingered. Thus, after the Depression until early in World War I, these were good years for Jews. But were they really? And if so, how? And how not? Jewish and non-Jewish interactions could depend on a person's age, location, and gender. We'll note that Jewish children throughout this era had good experiences despite disappointments. Older teenagers found more situationally and institutionally produced anti-Semitism in their schools, and university male students, most females didn't enter till 1908, suffered the most bigotry. Geography too played a role, a confusing one. Small towns could be hospitable and friendly, where Jewish and non-Jewish Germans, especially men, engaged in a variety of leisure, community, and volunteer activities, but boundaries remained. There were greater chances for increasing social interactions in more cosmopolitan cities, including intermarriage. I will try to show the complexity of Jewish and non-Jewish relationships by looking at Alltagsgeschichte, focusing on children and youth in schools and universities, as well as social leisure time for adults. I hope I have time. These can help us to nuance, to see contradictions and ambiguities, and to disentangle multiple strands of social interaction, from hostility to friendship and everything in between. Although I'm focusing on Jews, these moments of acceptance and animosity provide a vantage point from which to study German society as well. A variety of German non-Jewish behaviors emerge in the history of Jewish everyday life, forcing us to acknowledge diversity among Germans. As we examine German culture and society, in which Jews and non-Jews mingled, made business relationships, and cultivated friendships, memoirs, letters, and diaries offer an abundance of detail and provide valuable, often rare glimpses into mentalities and emotions. Although we also know that memory is fallible, the feelings seem fresh and alive. Starting with childhood. Let's examine some interactions between Jews and non-Jews by starting in the life cycle. By the imperial era, the vast majority of Jewish children attended public schools rather than Jewish schools. Public schools provided an opportunity to meet a wide range of children. Friendships occurred in school and en route to school or after school. Rahel Strauss, born 1880 in Karlsruhe, attended a secular public school. As a doctor, she later recalled, quote, "Whether our school was good or we learned a lot, I can't say. but that we took comradeship for granted was certainly worth more for the formation of our character than if we learned more of this or that. In fact, school often provided the first opportunity for some Jewish children to meet regularly with non-Jews. One man noted, "Until then, all of my playmates came from Jewish families. School was long and remained the only excursion into the non-Jewish world." Still, Christianity had vast cultural and religious significance. Toni Ehrlich, 1880, from Breslau, remembered her shock as a 7-year-old when a classmate asked to provide an example of an accusative verb, responded with, "Jews crucified our Savior." So it's an active verb. And so she was very surprised by that, but it remained the only significant blemish in her school life, filled with friends of all religions. And in Laupheim, Herta Natorf, born 1895, the only Jew in her class, insisted that greater animosity prevailed between Protestant and Catholic children, recalling being wooed by both sides. On a Catholic holy day, the Catholic children said to them, "We feel sorry for you. You have to remain with them today." And the Protestant children welcomed her with, "Today is fine. We are completely unter uns." That's a leitmotif all the way through, which is that Catholics and Protestants didn't treat each other well either. So that's something that you see all the time. Many Jewish children thus succeeded in having close relationships with non-Jews. Walter Elisov, born in 1891, attended school in what he called liberal Königsberg, where 10% of the students were Jewish, and he counted more non-Jewish than Jewish friends. Similarly, Toni Ehrlich, from an acculturated Breslau family, and the only Jew in her class, described unencumbered relations with many non-Jewish friends. And her sister met her lifelong non-Jewish friend in elementary school. And remember, lifelong means past the Nazi period, through the Nazi period. On the other hand, Käthe Frankenthal, 1889, reported more complicated relations in Kiel. Whereas non-Jewish classmates enjoyed coming to her home, her best friend did not invite Käthe to her birthday party. The wealthy hostess had included all of the little guests' mothers, but would not invite a Jewish woman. Frankenthal remembered her hurt decades later. Whereas children had the capacity to befriend each other, adult prejudice could destroy those friendships. Clearly, class prejudice played a role here, especially from aristocratic circles, but no class remained immune, and Jews, even children, felt a difference. Notwithstanding these varying degrees of acceptance, Jewish children also suffered upsetting moments and anti-Semitism, even physical attacks. Some Jewish children tried in vain to make non-Jewish friends, shutting down from sadness. In Nuremberg, Alex Bein, 1903, felt that Jews might have been secretly admired for their academic achievement, but non-Jewish gymnasts were the popular ones. He practiced gymnastics at home, took ice-cold showers to harden his body in order to make non-Jewish friends. Nevertheless, his only close friends were Jewish. These moments of sadness lingered long enough to be recorded many years later in memoirs. Even so, it is noteworthy that memoirists tend to see them as episodes in a relatively peaceful environment. Perhaps Norbert Elias summarized the situation most aptly for most Jewish children. He wrote, "Anti-Semitism was bad and distressing, but did not influence the core of our self-esteem." More tellingly, even when aware of anti-Semitism, Jewish children frequently sustained deep friendships with non-Jews. Around the turn of the century, 9-year-old Eva Ehrenberg took anti-Semitism for granted in her private school in Kassel, while girlfriends from the nobility, her girlfriends from the nobility, would not acknowledge her outside of school. She had non-Jewish friends and two lifelong non-Jewish best friends, including the daughter of an aristocrat. Indeed, in 1963, after a lifetime of correspondence, Eva could write what we can only consider a love letter from Israel to the aristocrat's daughter in Germany. She remembered how they first met. And I'm going to say this in German. Geliebte Nettie, und dann traf ich dich. Ich sehe es noch vor mir. Da kamst du hereingestürmt, hellblond, alles war hell an dir. Es war vor 56 Jahren, ein ganzes Leben pausenloser Freundschaft. Doch fing es nicht so einfach an, denn du gehörtest zu einer alten adligen Familie. Ihr hattet bisher auf eurem Gut nur Viehjuden gekannt. Du musstest darum kämpfen, mich einladen zu dürfen. Hang on one second. My computer just made everything too big. Okay. Und dann schreibt sie weiter. Even Hitler could not undo our lively, warm friendship. And during the Nazi years, the friends wrote countless letters to each other. Alles Glück, alles Unglück war und blieb gemeinsam. Difficulties notwithstanding, friendships with non-Jewish children, hang on one second, it's getting too big, generally provided Jewish peers with a feeling of safety. This is especially apparent in retrospect, when memoir writers compare these relatively peaceful early school years with later anti-Semitic ones after World War I. As they grew older, Jewish children tended to draw closer to other Jews. In part, this may have been self-defense, but it was also an imitation of their parents. The more Jews in a school, the more likely they could preserve some Jewish group solidarity. Rahel Strauss remained closest to two other Orthodox girls, despite her Christian friends. One day, a Protestant classmate asked her, "Why do you always go with the inferior students? We fit together much better. My father is a pastor, and your father was a rabbi. That's the same." Despite being embraced as the same, Strauss thought differently, responding that she liked the Protestant girl, but her Jewish friends would be her best friends. Born in 1876 in Berlin, Kurt Rosenberg underlined the importance of self-chosen affinity groups. Quote, "There was no fundamental Jew hatred in the Nazi sense. Nevertheless, Jews associated readily among themselves. But this occurred automatically and was, as it were, unconscious." Victor Klemperer, whom I'm sure you all know, born 1881, who later converted, felt similarly. He did not experience any overt anti-Semitism in his Berlin gymnasium. Quote, "Officially, definitely not, and unofficially, hardly. But during the Jewish holidays, one was unter uns, and in a religion class too." Further education could also divide young people, especially in villages. Proportionately more Jewish than non-Jewish teenagers left home for further education or apprenticeships. Those Jewish kids who remained had longer school days and less time for camaraderie. Similarly, young Jewish women sought further practical education and often married out of town. In fact, migration played a significant role in separating schoolmates and old friends. In addition, by the later 19th century, young adult Jews became more aware of social anti-Semitism, despite what I said earlier about anti-Semitic parties losing support. Complexities, once again. This could be seen most starkly at the university level. Universities were not now, actually never, ivory towers. And after 1879-80, Jewish men could rarely escape anti-Semitism on campus. If Jewish men were looking for respect and acknowledgement, they were badly disappointed. In Berlin during 1881, over 40% of male students signed anti-Semitic statements. And German students formed the highly visible Verein Deutscher Studenten that, along with the older fraternities, espoused a mixture of nationalism, monarchism, anti-Semitism. Its members argued that Jewish, quote, Jewish liberalism was the enemy of Christianity, and that although Jews improve with German education, they are not German and can never be so. Jewish male students reacted with outrage and sadness. Some of their fathers had been proud members of German fraternities. Their sons had grown up hearing about romantic fraternity traditions. They had looked forward to camaraderie and colored hats. Suddenly, young Jewish men found hostile fraternities that considered Jews unsuitable for the gloried tradition of excessive drinking and unworthy opponents in the barbaric but allegedly virile ritual of dueling. Indeed, anti-Semites refused to duel with Jews since they were not seen as honorable or satisfaktionsfähig, as they called it. Disappointingly, most Jewish male students even lost their non-Jewish gymnasium friends when these young men joined the anti-Semitic fraternities. In reaction to bigotry on campus and corresponding to the flowering of many different kinds of Jewish organizations in the late 19th century, Jewish men created their own fraternities, while others joined what was called the Free Students Association, a liberal inter-university group of unaffiliated students made up largely of Jewish men. Other Jewish students became more adamantly Jewish, forming their own non-fraternity Jewish student clubs, and others found Zionism. When they finally entered the university, Jewish women did not encounter the variety of clubs available to Jewish men. They did associate in new, what they called women's clubs. In Heidelberg, the women's club first elected a Jewish chairperson. The umbrella organization of women students, open to all, affiliated in 1915 with the German women's movement. Anti-Semitism, however, infected some women too. A year after Prussian universities opened to women, a Christian national, that is anti-Semitic, women's organization formed. It combined with similar ones in 1914. And yet, despite barricades created by anti-Semitism, increases in the rates of intermarriage suggest that more opportunities had opened for Jews and non-Jews to meet each other at work, universities, clubs. Statistics shed light on the increasing intimacy between the Jewish minority and those in the majority. In 1875, the introduction of civil marriage legalized marriage between Jews and non-Jews. Given the small size of the Jewish community and the difficulties of marrying within it, intermarriage rates grew from 4.5% in 1876 and 80 to 16.5% between 1911 and 1915. Jewish women tended to have worked before they intermarried, hence coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And the rate of intermarriage with males in the lead rose rapidly in the pre-war and war years, especially in large cities. Still, we need to remember that these percentages of a tiny minority, about 1% of all Germans, means that whereas Jewish leaders worried about intermarriage, few non-Jews may have even known about them. Intermarriages often had very romantic beginnings. Unlike intra-Jewish marriages, in which bourgeois parents often picked or at least influenced the choice of the partner, these couples fell in love. They then confronted their families, who accepted the decision, faced it reluctantly, or expressed intense opposition. Having overcome these obstacles, the couple achieved a happy ending, or at least a happy beginning. In 1904, Victor Klemperer, a university student, met Eva, a pianist. Years later, he wrote, "I immediately felt we belonged together." Their families strongly opposed the relationship. Hers, although poor, stemmed from the nobility and deplored his Jewish background. His preferred a woman with money, but had no difficulty accepting her religion. His brothers had intermarried too, despite their father being a rabbi. Although we cannot generalize from one love story, we can appreciate some of the mentalities and milieus in which these intermarriages happen. Young people do not usually marry the first person they date. Intermarriages show that Jews and non-Jews had ample opportunities to mix with and befriend each other, even to fall in love. However, questions still remain. How many families successfully thwarted such marriages? We just don't know. Now, the adults reaching out, social life with other Germans, moving from individual moments of acceptance and rejections to group interactions, we find a great variety of Jewish relationships with non-Jews. Although this too varied by region, class, urbanization, it's extraordinarily complex. These relationships tended to be more formal and less intimate than those among Jews, and far more likely to take place in a public forum rather than at home. Both informal and formal mixing can be best understood in the changing context of political anti-Semitism. The growth of anti-Semitism in the 1880s heightened non-Jewish exclusivity and Jewish defensiveness. Jews found clubs that had previously welcomed them closed and created their own. Friendships continued for some and frayed for others. Ultimately, a diverse picture of inclusion and exclusion, sometimes at the very same point, emerges. About 70% of Jews in 1871 and about 30% in 1910 lived in towns and villages where neighborliness, pleasant, informal contacts took place. Villagers viewed such connections as a social duty, even a social necessity. In Nonnenweier, for example, Jews sometimes helped non-Jews in the harvest, lent them money, or vouched for them, or gave them advice, quote, even in matters of the heart. Peasant families brought Jews barrels of fruit, either in gratitude or in exchange. Neighbors' children helped observant Jews turn on lights on the Sabbath. On special holidays, neighbors exchanged foods. Weddings remained a family affair, but Christian children attended bar mitzvahs. Funerals, much like sick calls, occasioned a spirit of community. Jews and non-Jews often attended one another's funeral processions and sometimes graveside rituals. Neighborliness could lean toward or turn into friendship. Personal home visits, however, were rare. But these were also rare between non-Jews. We have to remember that. It's not just the Jewish non-Jewish. Non-Jews didn't do that either. In a village in Lower Franconia, the Jewish teacher occasionally entertained the village pastor, who, quote, enjoyed coffee with matzot on Passover. These relationships indicate that Jews and non-Jews could cross boundaries, even when they acknowledged that boundaries existed. Some neighbors kept their distance. Different occupations, religious practices could reinforce misunderstandings. Jews also lived a more bourgeois life in these villages, signaled by their clothing, their home furnishings, and their educational expectations for their children. Further, the churches, particularly the local clergies, reinforced separation. Werner Kahnmann commented dryly, quote, "The teaching of the church, particularly around Easter, did not provide for a friendly atmosphere. But in Baden and Württemberg, for example, Jews also noted that Protestants and Catholics treated each other similarly or worse. Gender roles and duties kept housewives apart. In villages, neither Jewish nor non-Jewish women engaged in leisured pleasantries. Some had attended schools together, which guaranteed some familiarity. But as one non-Jewish woman explained, there wasn't any sitting around together. We had no time. Yet in some villages, Jews remained cognizant that anti-Semitism could arise if, for example, a young Jewish mother walked through town with a baby carriage, a luxury peasant families could not afford. Aware that class differences might provoke anti-Semitism, Jews in these towns often used the admonition, mach keinen Risches, which means don't create anti-Semitism. Clubs provided more social opportunities in villages, though mostly for men. And in small towns, men of the same class could meet informally. In Sobernheim, the Stammtische at the local tavern seem to have been completely integrated. Jewish and non-Jewish men of the lower middle class, tailors, grocers, shop owners, also regularly played cards or drank beer with each other. Middle and upper middle class men in small towns occasionally joined reading groups that attracted educated male citizens. From the 1870s through the heightened anti-Semitism of the 1880s, Victor Klemperer's father, a rabbi, belonged to just such a group in Brandenburg, whose members included public officials and professionals, as well as rabbis and the minister. Gymnastics, not only the most popular sport in Germany, but also ideologically associated with nationalism, attracted Jewish men who also enjoyed local riflemen's clubs, which combined nationalism with camaraderie. American Jews are always surprised that German Jewish men joined rifle clubs because American Jews tend to be pretty anti-gun. And so it's very interesting to see when they say that rifle clubs, but that's what happened. Veterans associations, the largest mass organizations in Imperial Germany, provided further opportunities for Jewish men to bond, as did volunteer firefighting units. They bonded with non-Jewish men in these groups. Certainly, these men came together because they liked to sing or display their manly shooting power or their patriotism, not because of bridge building. Still, rural historians suggest that the era before 1900 was the high point of Christian Jewish male sociability. In contrast to village and towns, gatherings grew in importance in the cities, which offered a vast variety of organizations. Integrated clubs revealed dwindling divisions between Jews and non-Jews. By the late 19th century, this form of sociability was such an ingrained part of Jewish bourgeois life that Jews saw it as part of what it meant to be bourgeois. Further, their participation announced, for all who cared to see, that they had achieved social recognition. These affiliations could lead to ongoing friendships. In such cities, a real test of integration would be how well Jews and non-Jews mixed at home. Among the very wealthiest groups, Jewish men mixed with non-Jewish men, both in public places during the day and at home, accompanied by wives in the evening. The Hamburg factory owner, Joseph Wachtel, ate his midday meal in a restaurant with other wealthy non-Jewish merchants and members of the Hamburg Senate. His wife held a salon for Jewish and non-Jewish intellectuals in their home. Although Hamburg had a liberal reputation, this also took place in Berlin. The case of Gershom Scholem's parents notwithstanding. That such interactions existed is not in doubt, but that they might be considered friendship is. Many merely saw it as a way to advance careers. So we can't just assume it was always friendship. Urban Jews and non-Jews mingled with greater success in intellectual, artistic, and bohemian circles. Max Hachenberg, a Jewish lawyer, and Adalbert Düringer, later an eminent judge, became close friends despite religious and political differences. They visited each other at home in Mannheim and corresponded regularly when Düringer moved away. When his friend died in 1924, Hachenberg gave the eulogy at the funeral. So they were very close. In Insterburg, Kurt Blumenfeld, born 1884 and later a well-known Zionist leader, noted, quote, "My parents' relations consisted entirely of intellectually and musically interested non-Jews." Several examples illuminate Jewish social success and its limits. The Heilbrunn family of Frankfurt provides a striking case. Although the head of the family participated in mixed social and political associations, he never entertained a non-Jew in his home. Other wealthy Jews in places as diverse as Frankfurt, Karlsruhe, and Königsberg invited Jews and non-Jews to dinner parties, but the guests remained predominantly Jewish. Even among the most integrated Jews, including converts and intermarriages, the successful banker Karl Fürstenberg noted that Jews often relied on each other. So what did Jewish participation mean within non-Jewish groups? The attitudes of liberal Freemasons may be indicative. Despite propounding brotherly love and eschewing religion, many in these local elites believed that for practicing Jews, it would be, quote, practically impossible to join with a Christian in intimate friendship. Such attitudes notwithstanding, by the mid-1870s, especially in Hamburg and Frankfurt, quote, Jewish Freemasons could feel that they were an important part of German lodge sociability without having to relinquish their Jewish identity. In the wake of anti-Semitic agitation of the 1880s, however, Jewish membership became politicized. Some lodges no longer accepted Jews, and some non-Jewish Freemasons, angered by the illiberalism of their brothers, formed new lodges which welcomed Jews, but eventually were made up mostly of Jews. In response to the 1880s and as an assertion of independence, Jewish men founded the B'nai B'rith. Many middle-class people joined more than one organization. Jewish women, for example, entered Jewish groups, as well as the Froebel societies, attracted by their progressive educational ideas. In the 1890s, Jewish and non-Jewish women established close ties in cities like Königsberg, where a number of Jewish women led the major women's organizations. At the national level, too, Jewish women held prominent positions in the women's movement, even as anti-Semitism grew. About 1/3 of the leaders of the early feminist movement were Jewish or of Jewish origin. Membership in the same clubs led to a glimpse into another person's character, but it could also lead to friendship. If friendship is too extreme an expectation, then I ask, did social capital like help, sympathy, and fellowship accrue to Jews who joined German associations? Did clubs provide, quote, social networks and the norms of reciprocity and trustworthiness that arise from joint activities? I can give a partial answer. Some Jewish feminists maintained friendships with non-Jewish women that went way beyond organization, implying mutual trust and reciprocal relations. In Berlin, activist and author Hedwig Dohm invited women and men of all confessions to her home. She had close contacts with non-Jewish intellectual women. Rosa Vogelstein founded a branch of the German women's movement in Stettin. A rabbi's wife, she and several leaders of the German Women's Association, all non-Jews, were very close friends, visiting each other at home regularly. So deep friendships did develop from some of these encounters. Even anti-Semites noticed this, accusing Jews of ostentatious charity intended as a means to an end, integration. Since so many opportunities to meet existed, what remains more striking than occasional anti-Semitic invective is that, quote, social distance remained on both sides. And now, unter uns, social life with other Jews. Just as Catholics related almost exclusively to Catholics and Protestants to Protestants, relationships with other Jews took up the bulk of Jewish social life. For leisure, Jews remained deeply enmeshed in their families. They were, quote, so big and so pronounced that family gatherings filled up the majority of one's life. In Munich, Rahel Strauss and her husband called on his large family every Sabbath. In the morning, he would half-jokingly say, quote, today we have to visit Uncle Moritz, Uncle David, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Angelo, Uncle Lothar, and she would cover her ears as the list went on. These family interactions were not free from tension, yet families gave crucial support, emotional and material. An uncle, for example, encouraged and paid for Rahel Strauss's entire medical education. Jews also showed a staunch allegiance to their religious and ethnic communities. This broad range of contacts, from intimate visits at home to membership in organization, enriched Jewish social life. In villages, Jews dropped in on each other on Sabbath afternoons. Unrelated Jews might meet in a beer garden. Acquaintances did come by on special occasions. Especially in towns with small Jewish populations, Jews reached out to other Jews. In larger towns, both family and friends, observant and non-observant Jews, participated in the Saturday coffee ritual. For them, a secularized form of Sabbath. These visits, part of also a bourgeois calling culture, reaffirmed friendship and family. Urban Jews entertained each other privately. In the 1880s, Sidonia and Leopold Dahn recalled, quote, every Friday and Saturday afternoon, friends came to us for tea, cake, and conversation. They celebrated the Jewish holidays, especially the more social ones at home, among relatives and Jewish friends. In Breslau, at the turn of the century, Lotte Hirschberg's family played chamber music regularly with other Jewish friends. Trying to make this custom understandable to her grandchildren in the 1990s, she explained that her parents played chamber music the way we listen to the radio or watch television today. And of course, now we're on our iPhones, so we don't do the other stuff either. Urban cultural events provided another venue for friends and family to meet. From the major urban centers to the smallest villages, many Jews also came together in synagogue. A communal religion, Jewish practice, took place within a social environment. Photos of Jews milling around synagogues after services attest to acquaintances formed and fostered there. Simply being Jewish, however, was not enough. Class was also a consideration. For example, the dance class, a prime symbol of bourgeois aspirations, both reinforced class distinctions and allowed some social movement within the urban bourgeoisie. Philip Löwenfeld recalled that in Munich, the sons of the, quote, fine Jewish families, those with money or titles, attended dance lessons made up of Jews and non-Jews. The children of, quote, ordinary Jewish business people took lessons in which only middle-class Jews participated. As a teenager, Löwenfeld preferred the Jewish class because his friends were there, but his parents insisted that he participate in the, quote, better dance class. Indeed, Jewish clubs and organizations provide crucial social arenas for the Jewish populations. These organizations expanded in the 1880s, so that by the 1890s, there was a veritable organizational renaissance. About 40% of the approximately 5,000 Jewish clubs in Germany in 1906 had formed in the last quarter of the 19th century. Women's organizations also spread rapidly, spurred on by the growing feminist movement. More than half of all German women's organizations in 1908, the year the vast majority of women could legally join or create political organizations, had been founded after 1900. So within 8 years, half of them had been founded. This included the Jüdische Frauenbund, which united Jewish women's groups across Germany. Established by Berta Pappenheim in 1904, the League grew to 35,000 members in the first 10 years. The League's emphasis on women's equality and its alliance with the German women's movement gave it feminist form to its home economics schools, its job counseling centers, its opposition to the traffic in women, and its night classes for women. These organizations represent only a few of the most prominent of a profusion of Jewish organizations. There were associations for rabbis, for Jewish teachers, for religious employees, and they grew nationally and regionally. There were Jewish singing clubs, hiking clubs, study groups that vied with non-sectarian groups. Although this was an era of unprecedented associational growth in society at large, and Jews joined many non-sectarian groups, they also had reasons for their own clubs. Some preferred a Jewish milieu. Others turned to Jewish associations for community, cultural heritage that they no longer sought from religion. And still others, as already noted, joined in response to the increasing anti-Semitism of the 1880s. World War I heightened the complexity of the relationships between Jews and other Germans. The situation looked promising at first, as the emperor included Jews, recognizing only Germans. The playwright Ernst Toller observed, quote, oops, okay, I'll be finished in a minute. No, in 3 minutes. We were living in a state of emotional delirium. Jewish organizations and newspapers and individuals professed their unconditional love of Germany. Jewish women, like many other women, were gripped by the same fervor. And yet early military successes gave even some enthusiastic Jews pause. Bertold Freudenthal, who prayed for German victory, asked his diary, "What will the new Germany look like?" He replied, "Outwardly perfect, inwardly a great deal of self-confidence, indifference toward the interests of others, many prejudices also against Jews." Okay, my conclusion. I'm not skipping very much. I'm just, the setbacks at the front turned public opinion against Jews. So you know that, 1916, the Judencount, you know all that. Okay, conclusion. At the beginning of this talk, I asked, what is the role of contingency in German Jewish history? We have seen the capricious relationship between Jewish intentions and historical events. Sometimes they worked hand in hand, as during the 19th century struggle for emancipation, when industrialization and liberalism advanced Jewish hopes and aspirations. Other times they were at odds, as during World War I, when Jews demonstrated their patriotism and faced growing anti-Semitism. And in between these markers, Jewish integration was neither smooth nor certain. Thus, successes and setbacks affected the way different generations of Jews perceived their situation. Those who experienced official inequality before 1871, and then the onset of emancipation remained hopeful. Their children, brought up in the imperial era, faced uneven, dizzying roller coaster of opportunity and anti-Semitism, and were often more pessimistic. These shifting allegiances affected and reflected Jews' differing self-definitions. Jakob Wassermann described his anguish. German Jew. One has to emphasize both words thoroughly. His twofold love and his battle on two fronts drive him to despair. Yet others, like Gustav Landauer, the cultural critic and anarchist, whose life spanned the imperial era, exemplifies another group of Jews. He wrote in 1913, "I have never had the need to simplify myself or create an artificial unity. I accept my complexity and hope to be even more many-sided." In other words, Jews engaged in conscious or unconscious forms of resistance, accommodation, or acceptance vis-a-vis anti-Semitism, sometimes hurt and angry, other times shrugging their shoulders. Between group and individual experiences lay a multitude of daily exchanges between Jews and other Germans. Jews thus bridged two worlds, depending on political and social eras. In liberal times, they maintained intense relationships with their Jewish families, friends, clubs, and communities, while interacting with non-Jewish Germans, mostly in public, charitable, professional, and business organizations, but also in friendship. Still, Jews found them, despite the worries about anti-Semitism, Jews found themselves more integrated than at any time in prior German history. At greater or lesser emotional cost to themselves, Jews continued to build families, careers, and communities, their futures, quote, at home in Germany, end quote. Thank you.